All right, welcome back. This is Racing Rundown. This is actually a re-record of an episode that we did with Amy Hoffer, writer of an expository piece on horse racing wrongs. We originally recorded the whole show, and then next day I did the regular podcast with Eric, and I overwrote the file, so we have to do this again. So this is a re-record, but we're here with Amy, and also my friend Kendra's also here to help us with this. Sorry about that, I had an audio cut out. Okay, so without further ado, here we are. We have Amy and also Kendra. So, how are you guys doing today?
Good, thank you. Just spent the afternoon with horses. What a better way to spend the day.
Same here. I'm working with some horses right now, and it's been a pretty good day so far.
Yeah, well, they're loving the upstate New York weather, that's for sure. Spunky and punky.
Yeah, it was actually
California rain.
It was actually a nice day here out on the East Coast for once. But so I do just want to mention one more time, if you've not checked out the article already, you can go check it out. And also, if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to say to Amy about the article, you can reach out to her on Twitter at AmyHoffer1. You can also send me a message at Rundown Racing or shoot me an email, Racing Rundown Podcast, any of those ways. But so the first question of sorts that I'd like to ask you is, when you were writing the article and doing your almost 2 years of research on horse racing wrongs, what was the most striking thing about them that you found?
Well, after I got over the initial shock of the sterilized to extinction reply via a private Facebook message, every once in a while I just go on and check out what's going on. And I came across a story. It was posted September 2018, and the headline was, "As winning horse heads to death, connections pose for celebratory picture." So that kind of sparked my attention. So I read it, and I thought, boy, that kind of horrible if it's true. So I checked out the photo, the winner's circle photo, and I looked at it. I said, it seems just a little off. So I just did 10 minutes or less, minimal time and effort, and I confirmed and found out that the people in the defamatory story were not at all connected to the horse that had broken down and subsequently had to be euthanized. The owner and trainer were indeed with the horse. They were not in the winner's circle celebrating. So I reached out to the president and founder of Horse Racing Wrongs via email because I'm blocked from commenting on their page, just to let him know that his information was not accurate. But what he replied back is that really doesn't matter who's in the winner's circle and who isn't. In the end, a horse dies, racing celebrates. I firmly disagree with that, being that his headline is "As winning horse heads to death, connections posed for celebratory picture," and that was the whole basis of his story. It was to evoke emotion and anger and get people, subscribing to his message.
And the other point that I want to bring up about that is there was also the jockey of that horse in that picture, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that the jockey was required to be in that picture as well, so he couldn't have been in any other situation. Is that correct?
That is correct. As sponsorship opportunities, the jockey does have to be in the winning photo with the race sponsors, and that's who was actually in the photo. And again, I'm not minimalizing the injury to Gada's applause. However, I watched the video. It wasn't one of those horrific, dramatic breakdowns. It was, she did have an injury. She crossed the wire. She was loaded onto the van under her own power. So I would firmly believe, even at the time of the photo, the jockey probably did not even know. Probably at the time, they were probably still making decisions about the horse, and the jockey didn't even know, how serious the injury was. So it's really a non-story. It's a defamatory story.
Yeah, and I can tell you that decisions take a while because a friend of mine had a horse breakdown, and I was at home, so I wasn't there. And it took them a couple hours before they called me and told me that they ultimately had to make the decision to put the horse down. But yeah, it wasn't like immediately after her race. It took them a little bit of time to assess the situation.
Yeah, and so it's really a defamatory comments that were made. It was really in poor taste. It was purely just to raise emotions and anger and make a story of something. The only thing true in the story is that the horse was euthanized.
And I can third that point, because if we remember back to the Breeders' Cup, the Mongolian groom situation, he had the injury, and I think it was, I think it was north of three and a half hours before we heard the final decision. So yeah, these decisions are not made like snap of the fingers right off the bat. People want to know the options, as anyone who owns a horse should want to know their options before they make a decision like that. So that's a very good point to make, that stuff on the surface, it's not what it would seem. And I can understand why you would check that out, and by the title of the story, how that would be an article that could grab some person's attention, because as someone like you're just scrolling through, you see that, you don't know the context of what it's written in, and it could mean something completely different. And that's a great point that you bring up, that is defamatory, because it's not, it's taking something in a context that is not the correct context.
Right, and again, despite what the founder and president of Horse Racing Wrong says, that doesn't matter who's in the photo or not in the photo, it really does matter, because that was the whole premise of that story.
Because if it was the owners, that would be a completely different story. But as you mentioned, the owners were back at the barn with the horse, so definitely that highly misleading. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe you said that that's the modus operandi of Horse Racing Wrongs, is to create misinformation, and or not necessarily that's not what their public message is, but that's what happens 9 times out of 10, is they take something and they spin it the way that they want it to, spin the story the way that they want it to sound, and then put it out there to create emotion and stuff like that.
Well, sure, they pull at people's heartstrings in order to open purse strings. People are pretty good-hearted. We don't want to see anything bad happen to animals. We don't want to see abuse. But also by pointing out to him that his information was not accurate, and he didn't correct the story, he didn't change any headlines, that's really a disservice to the loyal followers of Horse Racing Wrongs. I mean, those people, they spend their time, their energy, and their money supporting that organization, and they're all often finding themselves defending their leadership. And for him to do that, I mean, they really got duped as well. Even one of the people that made a comment, that you can tell by her comment, Joy Atten, who is a board member, that she's still under the impression that the owner and the trainer were in the winner's circle.
Yeah.
So it duped a board member too. And by the way, their board consists of 3 people. It's the president and founder, his girlfriend, and a third person, Joy Atten. So for a board to make any votes and decisions, you need a quorum. So they need 2 people to vote yes on something. So basically 2 people who are sharing the same address just need to vote yes on something to pass it. That's a lot of power concentrated in one area.
That's a good point to make up. And also, I do want to mention that Joy Atten also has some connections to Cantor, so for what that's worth, that could also be thrown in there.
Yeah, actually, I've never engaged with Joy Atten. I don't know her. Of the group, she is the one that does seem to have some knowledge of horses. But again, she's been misled by Patrick. Here's her comment. She wrote, "Family members, they're like our children, yet there they are, not alongside her while she's taking her last breaths. So to me right there, that shows she was misled as well.
And, that's something that I can second. You can go through and find all this. Patrick's actually said this in one of his more recent posts. He said he's not a horse person. Neither is Nicole, but there was one particular incident where he was talking at a forget what event the venue was at, but he was speaking at that, and he said that he wasn't a horse person. He's never been around horses. And to my knowledge, he has a poor knowledge of horse anatomy. And think there was a particular incident that I wanted to bring up, another case of misinformation. There was a filly at Saratoga this summer by the name of Divine Miss Gray, and she suffered an injury in a race. She was vanned off, and they did surgery on her. She had sesamoid injuries, and they did surgery on her, and the surgery ultimately was not successful, and she had to unfortunately be euthanized. And it was identified in the Daily Racing Form, which he has quoted before, but he tends not to quote the Daily Racing Form very often. But they identified it as sesamoid injuries, and he called it fetlock surgery. So and he said fetlock surgery, and then phrased it multiple other times as a fetlock injury. So people who know horses, as Amy and Kendra do, and myself too, but not to the extent that they do, know that sesamoids and fetlocks are not the same thing. So that's another example right there of something, and I'm sure if someone called him out on that, he would not be too obliged to go amend that.
Well, he would say it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, a horse died. That seems to be the canned response. And as you had pointed out, as far as him not knowing much about horses, I think it is important because they have designated themselves as the educators to the public, so they better know what they're talking about when it comes to horses. Just a few true stories here. Had one of his very loyal followers post that thoroughbreds are created only specifically to run and through artificial insemination. As any of us in the horse world know, thoroughbreds have to be through a live cover. So I told her perhaps she should look that up. Had another person in my effort to educate about the use of the crop. This is actually a funny one. This one is kind of humorous. I said, the crop is used for other things, for safety measures, steering the horse and cueing horses to change leads. The person replied back to me, well, you don't know what you're talking about because I saw one used on a horse who wasn't in the lead. So right there, I was like, oh, I know you're not a horse person just based on that comment.
And if I can interject here, I do want to bring up something about the crop use, and that just a shallow plug. I had Joe Bravo on the show a couple days ago. That should be up within a day or so after this video goes up. But if any of the racing fans that we have are watching this program, you remember when Joe was on Blue Prize in the 2018 Spinster, and how Blue Prize shifted out severely. For whatever reason, that doesn't really matter for a point of discussion right now, but when she shipped it out, Joe told me, he said, thank God I had a riding crop there because it could have been really dangerous if I didn't have that. So, that's to make the point that, and, as Amy, someone who rides horses, will tell you, a riding crop it is duly important to have because that's your way of controlling the horse and helping them do and move the way that will keep them safe.
Well, especially in racing, because in racing, a jockey doesn't have leg to use. People seem to think that you steer a horse with the reins. We try to ride with leg, less with reins. So jockeys, of course, up in their perched positions, they don't have the opportunity to do that, which is why they carry a crop. For people who are non-horse people, horses move away from pressure. So if you want your horse to go to the right, you're going to give them a little tap with the left, and vice versa. And that's also used to straighten them out. It's also used to cue lead changes. And lead changes don't mean the position in the race.
So
it's their gait.
So yeah, those are some points to bring up. Now, I'll toss it over to you, Kendra. What were some of the big takeaways that you had from that article?
Amy's article, or
Yeah, Amy's article.
Not really knowing a lot about horse racing and wrongs going in, besides seeing the posts on social media as I am part of a V Sport horse racing group. It was definitely an eye-opener, especially seeing someone dive in and dig out. Like, I had never heard of the gratis applause situation, and then the sterilized to extinction comment coming up. That was actually my introduction to Amy, was seeing that screenshot of, and that really hit home for me, especially because I come from a rodeo background and I use quarter horses in my daily life. So the idea of someone thinking they can take my horses away was like not the greatest feeling in the world. And then also just being a part of horse racing, this was really, I've been sharing this a lot, and especially to people who don't really know a lot about horse racing, and they have definitely given me feedback saying it's an eye-opener for them too.
And Kendra, to echo that, I've had people read my article who, don't care about horse racing one way or another. Just read it because, they're friends, they're, acquaintances, whomever. And really their takeaway was, wow, this is scary, as far as some of the comments about not wanting people to be able to own pets. People are like, this is bigger than horse racing. This movement is much bigger than horse racing. This is trying to control people's lives and what they do in their daily lives. So even though you might not care about horse racing, you might not follow horse racing, it's likely you enjoy having the right to love and own your pet.
Yes,
and I want to take that away too.
Yeah, because I have friends that run barrels with me. I have friends that do dressage, show jumping, the works. And when I tell them, like, hey, you might not follow horse racing like I do, but this organization has this idea that they can take our horses away, they immediately were like, wait, what? Like, it's an all of a sudden an automatic, like, if horse racing goes, you're next.
You got it.
Yeah, they were all of a sudden started to embrace.
Yeah, and that's a very good point that you bring in, and we were going to get to. I was going to bring that point up at some point, but good to address it now. Is that I've seen people on, whether it's on Instagram or whether it's on Twitter, I've seen a lot of people before who are in other horse industries, be it dressage, be it cross country, any of that kind of stuff, and it really, I don't know if disheartening is the right word, but it really kind of is a head scratcher when I see people in those industries against horse racing, because it bears letting them know that these people, they are not going to stop with horse racing. And like what Amy mentioned with this is bigger than just a horse racing thing. These are people that want to tell people how they should and shouldn't live their lifestyle. If you dig back through, Patrick's had positions with the Albany Times-Union before as an animal rights blogger, which, by the way, he did leave that position full-time in 2010 because he didn't want to deal with people scrutinizing him for having his pizza restaurant, which we'll address that in a couple of minutes. But, some of his pieces, he wrote stuff like a petless society is a rational society. And, we've all heard the other animal rights extremist groups, like, for example, PETA saying stuff like that. But this extends to them, too. So that's a good thing to bring up as well, too.
Because, like, I do rodeo. I've grown up in a rodeo family. My dad worked for a stock contractor. And rodeo, I don't really know statistics, is probably the second biggest bash equestrian sport that we have. And we have the PETA protesters and all that stuff. And yeah, the idea that someone can come in and stop us too. I think as soon as horse racing goes, rodeo will probably be next, followed by everything else, if they get their way.
And I did mention at the top of recording that this is our second take. I want to highlight something that Amy said in the first recording. She talked about horse racing is probably the only equestrian sport that the average everyday American has had any kind of exposure to.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, and I think you called it a low-hanging fruit or something like that.
It is. It's a low, excuse me, it's a low-hanging fruit. It's easy to pick on, and it's easy to pick on because the general public knows what it is. When's the last time somebody said to you, hey, how'd you like that dressage competition on TV the other night? Well, they probably didn't air it. So, racing it's very easy to pick on. It's low-hanging fruit, and Kendra, as you said, rodeo will be the next on the food chain. Another very misunderstood sport.
So that's something that to kind of end off this point. That's a message that I want to just send out to any person from if any people from any other equestrian activities are tuning into this show right here. Don't think that they're going to stop with horse racing, because even though they're after horse racing, it doesn't seem like they're gonna. It might seem like that, but they're not going to. So that is something that should be.
They posted they're unequivocally against all equine disciplines. I have that screenshot too.
Oh, really? That's funny, because I've seen some people in their comments say that horse racing is the only equestrian sport that needs to go. So once again, contradiction.
No, I have a screenshot from Horse Racing Wrongs that they are unequivocally against all equine sports and disciplines.
So we've hit on that before. We've hit on all that. I do also want to bring up the hypocrisy point. And I think, Kendra, you said you wanted to take this on. So I'll hand over the hypocrisy point to you.
So the real thing I wanted to go with here was more or less what they're doing when they protest was kind of the point I wanted to hit home, because as we know, well, those of you who don't know, I'm from California, so I deal head-on with basically anything that comes out of Santa Anita, because that is the track I visit basically all the time. And so we've had a lot of Horse Racing Wrongs activity back here, and they started out seeing, like, when I read Amy's article about your first encounter with them, they seemed like peaceful protesting, like just standing there with signs, trying to get people to, like, talk to them, I guess. But we start to notice that kind of the deeper we get into this, they started going to the CHRB meetings and disrupting them. Mm-hmm. They're dressed in like funeral attire, shouting outrageous things, and they usually have like cardboard cutout headstones with the horses' names on them, or the horses that passed away. They did a funeral march down in the LA area. I don't quite remember what that was, and they were dressed in black, carrying the headstones. And then Amy and I touched on this the first time we recorded this, because it had just happened, but they did a Cube of Truth on December 9th at the Staples Center, where they would stand in a square, and they had, I think, Amy, you called them Antifa masks.
I said they looked like Antifa, but I did learn their masks patterned after Guy Fawkes, who I looked up, and it's silly. It's being anonymous.
Anyways, they had the masks on with the TVs that showed what we can assume would be breakdowns at the Staples Center. And so it just seems they're getting more extremist as we get into this. And who knows what they're going to do next.
I also did see a bunch of them dressed up in horse costumes and laid down on the Los Angeles District Attorney's steps.
Yes, that came out right after. They did that right after the report came out.
Now, was that a Horse Racing Wrongs organized thing, or was it a PETA organized thing, or it was a horse?
No, it was Horse Racing Wrongs. And we know how well that went over with the the LA County prosecutor, being that they've recently found no abuse, nothing done wrongfully or illegally. So,
and
that's how well that worked out for them with their theatrics.
And
there is a 17-page report on the LA County District Attorney, and I have read it, and it's very thorough, very extensive, and so they cleared Santa Anita of all criminal and abuse charges.
Now,
so that tactic worked out well. They were really taken seriously.
Now, I just want to hit on a point that, or go back to what Amy was saying. You know how Amy, and she talked about this in her article about how, you know, her first interactions with horse racing wrongs was just kind of them, you know, just people who were standing outside the track, just minding their own, just holding their signs, not really saying anything. And this isn't just happened at Sarah. If you don't know, I'm on the East Coast, so the track that I've had exposure to them with is specifically Saratoga. I've seen them at Belmont Park. One of them cut in front of my car when I was going to the Belmont Stakes last year. Almost caused an accident with some people, but main interaction with them had been at Saratoga, and I know I've personally been heckled. I was originally going to have Patrick on my show. Good decision not to do that. I was convinced not to do that, but I've been heckled by them before, and you know, he doesn't like me because I'm apparently a small person. He has great nicknames for people. Amy is Smug Apologist. I
love it.
I'm Small Human and Damn Coward. Kendra, I assume if you come out to the East Coast, you'll get a nickname.
Yeah, I have dealt with I haven't personally actually have an encounter with horse racing wrongs or Patrick, but we deal with over here in California. If you're at Santa Anita, you get Heather, and if you're at Del Mar, you get Ellen. And
lucky you.
Have run-ins with both of them, and even to the point where one of their people got arrested, and yeah, it's really fun back here.
But, you know, the point that I want to bring up is, you know, Patrick has addressed it because someone wrote an op-ed in the Albany Times-Union about, wrote an op-ed in the Albany Times-Union telling, or kind of saying that horse racing wrongs should take a more reasonable route to things and how they shouldn't be out to ban everything unequivocally because it's obviously never going to happen. So they should look for the route of horse welfare as opposed to outright banning. And the person mentioned how they yell at people coming into the gates. And of course, the knee-jerk reaction by all of them. I've seen Ellen say this too. And Ellen mentioned that the person who got arrested was arrested, in her words, was arrested because she was being harassed by one of the counter-protesters out there. I can't remember his name, but that's what her story was. And Patrick has said that the only times that he's been confrontational with people is when old men, and this was his phrase, is older men attacked some of our female protesters and said malicious words to them, which I can avow that is 100% not true, being the fact that I've been heckled, and I didn't heckle them first. I was minding my... The incident happened when I was at Saratoga on Whitney Day. I was helping some people. I was sitting down in between helping people make bets on some of the races, and I just happened to be sitting alone at a picnic table, and it was the closest picnic table to them, and someone must have told Patrick that I was sitting there, and so he came over and told me that I needed to go back to summer camp, and a whole bunch of fun stuff. And, you know, from talking to some of the people that were around there, you know, I got a story from a girl who was selling newspapers, and she was about my age, maybe a year younger, 16 or 17. She was selling the Albany Times-Union, actually, and he came up to her and proceeded to tell her that she hated horses and got in her face to the point where she had to ask security to get him away from her because she was uncomfortable with that. So that notion, and I assume that I haven't seen it personally, but I assume that stuff happens at Santa Anita and Del Mar because, you know, I have seen a couple of the videos with Oscar, who has also been on the show, the backstretch workers organizer, who has gone over, who has been asked before by the Animal Rights News organization that is, to their credit, they are at least trying to hear both sides. So I do want to just put that out there. To their credit, they are trying to hear both sides. Of course, they do have that bias as they are an animal rights organization, so they're horse racing wrongs leaning. But when that person asked Oscar to come over and do kind of an interview thing with her, the protesters got in his face. And there was one particular incident where he brought water over to them because Oscar's just a great guy, so he was taking concern for them, so he offered them water, and they got in his face and told him to go away. So all chivalry is lost out on the West Coast with their mindset. So I do want to bring that stuff up, that is something worth mentioning.
Okay. So besides being not transparent and telling half-truths, we can also add hypocrisy into this recipe. No pun intended. Patrick does own a pizza parlor, Little Anthony's in Albany. Proudly fourth generation. I think he's third generation. As people may already know, he's a vegan, and that's his prerogative. That's fine. He's also scoffed people for making monies off the backs of animals. So I don't understand why it's okay for him to earn a living off the backs of animals while other people cannot.
Yeah, and that's a good point to bring up. And of course, when you mention anything like that, and you mentioned that their supporters often find themselves defending their leadership all the time. Whenever
they do, I actually kind of feel sorry for them, believe it or not, because they just don't know what they don't know. Let's face it, in this day and age, to be deemed an expert in something, you only need to know slightly more than your audience.
Which, if your audience knows nothing, then it's fairly easy to fit that bill. But the one thing now I want to hit on this point that someone brought up, because someone's actually been able to get an answer out of him before on why it's okay for him to run the pizza restaurant and other people. But this person wrote an article for it wasn't in the Albany Times-Union, but it was an op-ed about it. The person's name was Kevin Marshall, and the title of the article was "The Cross is So Heavy." And Patrick's response when he was asked about it is he needs money, and he needs money. That's what the quote was. Is I need money.
He needs to feed his family is what he was quoted as saying.
Mm-hmm. So he's been quoted as he needs to feed his family, or I need money. So it's clearly okay in his eyes, it's okay for him to make money off the backs of animals, which he's making money off the backs of animals in an extremely separate way to calling it making money off the backs of animals in horse racing is not
it's imminent death.
Yeah, it's not the connotation that
so succinct.
That's not the connotation that I want to give horse racing, though, is making money off the backs of animals. But that is actually making money off the back of an animal through the death of it.
Yeah, no doubt. Directly, it's imminent.
So that's definitely a point that I wanted to bring up there, and the way that he's talking on, and a point that I was going to get to earlier, but we wanted to hit on something else, is the people that are part of this organization. When you bring this up, the trademark defense that they will say is pizza does what he does with his pizza. I've actually had conversations before with the aforementioned Ellen Erickson, and when I asked her about that, she's like, what he does with his pizza doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that horses are dying. So it's either the people don't know about this, or the ones that do don't care. So those other people are complicit with hypocrisy too.
Interesting.
Do you have anything else that you want to add to the hypocrisy note, Kendra?
Nope, I think we hit all the points, especially the ones I wanted to bring up.
So before we end this off, is there anything else pressing that either of you think that we have yet to mention up to this point?
I think it's just important that, I think I can speak for myself and Kendra, that we are not condoning abuse of any animal. We are for animal welfare, not animal rights. Those are two completely different things, and people think they're synonymous, and they're really not.
Thank you. No, that's a great point to make up, because I will tell you, I have had some run-ins. One of my friends in Florida who has documented the greyhound racing industry there doesn't have direct involvement with them, but over the course of last year went out to all the greyhound facilities in Florida and documented what conditions are really like there, and that's another example of animal rights extremism to the max. The greyhound racing industry in Florida. I'll leave a link to his YouTube channel, so if you're interested in checking out what life is really like for Florida greyhounds, it's not the way that it's been spun by PETA or the Humane Society or anything like that. So, but that's a good point that you make up. And that's something that he says too, is that animal welfare and animal rights are two completely different things.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. The general public doesn't realize that, though.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they think it's synonymous. So I think that's something through education that we just need to change.
Yeah, and the definition. Yeah, and it's funny because I have a definition for that, and it's like animal cruelty exists when a person maliciously and intentionally maims, mutilates, tortures, or wounds a living animal, or maliciously and intentionally kills an animal. It also exists when a person subjects an animal to needless suffering, inflicts unnecessary cruelty in a manner of abuse, or fails to provide the animal with proper food, water, or shelter. And I can tell you right now that none of that happens in the racing industry, for at least for the ones that are the good in this world.
And that's something that I want to bring up too, is that I've heard a lot of people before, like a lot of people on social media before, who are they're not the extreme, they're just people who have good hearts and they really do actually care about animals. And they've said things, and people in the racing industry have said, it's not the way that it's been portrayed. And I've seen on numerous instances before people be offered the opportunity to go out to racetracks and see what it's really like on a backside. And for anyone who is on the fence about this issue, asking people in the racing industry are very open to talk about life on the backside, because people want everyone to understand. And I want to highlight this in the piece that Tim Layden did for NBC prior to the Breeders' Cup. He said something to the extent of, racing people want the world to know that this industry cares about the horses. And that's something that any person who's on a backside, if you ask them, will definitely assure you of that. And they can provide you, that they can show you the amount of care that goes into this. And something that I do also want to mention, I did forget to mention this, this is something that goes all the way back to 2017, but a couple of people that are in We Support Horse Racing definitely know about this firsthand. But the San Luis Rey fires in 2017, that's the perfect example. If you want to go see what the United States racing industry is about, that's something to go look at. But Horse Racing Wrongs came out within a day after the San Luis Rey fires and said that to care about horses is to not contribute to those funds, because it involves horse racing, which that's unequivocally not true.
Well, part of the... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. The one thing I hate that the San Luis Rey fire incident happened, and that so many horses were lost. But the one thing I love about that is how we came together as a community to support everyone involved. I mean, Del Mar was overflowing. I love seeing the videos and the pictures of all the volunteers and just everyone. And even there's the video where the groom gets reunited with his horse. That makes me cry every time.
And that stuff's not scripted. That stuff's not scripted.
Not only is it not scripted, it's usually not, put out to the public as a feel-good story.
And I'll quote Art Wilson from the LA Times when he says it, quote, "It's just an example of how much these horses are loved and cared for, and how much people are willing to risk their lives to save them." We've all heard the stories of people going back into the fires to get horses and everything. So, and I think that's a great point that Kendra brings up, is that, it's awful that the San Luis Rey fires happened, but it's a testament to the United States racing industry. Like, at its good, that's what the United States racing industry is. And that's what people should see when they think about the United States racing industry.
Nope, totally agreed.
So, with all that being mentioned, I'll pose it one more time to you guys. Do you think there's anything else that we have not mentioned that should be mentioned?
I think we're good, and I think I'm kind of glad we did this again.
Yeah.
We covered a lot more than we did last time.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I do want to, again, apologize about that. I put that video out, and I overwrote the I overwrote the recording file. So anyway,
That happens.
yeah, this has been Racing Rundown again. You can go check out Amy on Twitter at Amy Hoffer 1. You can reach out to me on any of my various social media platforms or my email. Kendra, you want to throw in your Twitter handle in case people want to go give you a follow?
Yeah, so my Twitter is at KStorm Racing, and you can also go hit up my Instagram, which is at KS at the track, and there's underscores between everything.
Yeah, Kendra takes some good pictures at the racetrack, better than I could take. So go take a look at her pictures. She's got some good ones. Anyway, this is probably the last video of the year 2019 that's going to be on the Racing Rundown channel. So we'll be back after the new year. So after Merry belated Christmas, because this will come out after Christmas. But Happy New Year, and we'll see you next year.